Thank you so much for joining us today. We are SoftComply and we are running this new format of user forums this year for all of our customers who have been using Jira, have been using our risk apps on Jira. And welcome to this session today. Today we are focusing, of course, on information security and cybersecurity, more specifically, as it was announced. Thank you for joining. I see some people are still signing up, but I will go through some logistics before I start the webinar and introduce our beautiful guests today. You have a couple of options, of course, to chat with us. You can use the below in the bottom menu of the Zoom window. So you're welcome to do that. Some reactions are available as well if you're especially loving something that was said. Let's see. And yeah, as it is a user forum, we really recommend you raising all the questions you might have on the perspective of information security and cybersecurity. But Monica, you probably have met me or Marian already. I have Marian today with me. I'm showing this way because on my screen, she's on the left. But you haven't met our guests. So today we have Lauri from Estonia, welcome. And we have Peter from Belgium. Really amazing guys with really interesting backgrounds. But first, I will let you to introduce yourselves, of course. Lauri, could you start, please, with a short intro?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Hello, everyone. And thank you, Monica and Marian, for inviting me to actually participate in this webinar. As you can see, my name is Lauri, and I work for the Estonian Information System Authority, and in particular, the National Cybersecurity Center, which is a large unit within the Information System Authority. The National Cybersecurity Center in Estonia is what we call, in like a bureaucratic term, like a competent authority, which basically corresponds to what ANSSI in France and BSI is in Germany. And so this is RIA, something that is the acronym that we go by. My job in particular has been for years to be the incident analyst for cybersecurity incidents in general. But in the last 3 years in particular, I've been privileged to lead a team working on research, development, innovation, and entrepreneurship in cybersecurity, which also focuses on the skills gap and basically improving the cybersecurity competence all around Europe and in Estonia.
Okay, I will definitely have some questions for you, Lauri, in a few seconds or minutes. Peter, what is your background and what is your kind of hot take on information security?
Hi all, I'm Peter. I'm based in Belgium, Leuven, the nice beer city. I've been in IT for quite some time, and I'm now the Chief Operating Officer at Doccle. And we are a small company. I will come back to that later. But we are a small company, a digital company, where we try to put customers and suppliers together in one digital application, so you can receive invoices, other stuff via a mobile app. And yeah, my role is several roles, but certainly cybersecurity, compliance, and also, of course, our support for our customers. So that's a bit my background. So in IT, but also compliance is very important to us.
Thank you guys for the introductions. We are first looking into the NIS2 directive, of course, having this new edition of the directive available now and being transposed into member state legislations at the moment. Laura, maybe you know some insights. What is actually the struggle behind implementing this new directive? Because the old directive has been in place for quite some time and being also transposed to legislation. So what's the catch now? Why it's taking so long?
Yes, obviously it's weird to see all around Europe that only, like 7 countries have transposed this into law already, and there's the rest of the 20 member states are struggling, or what is the struggle behind it? But you have to understand that implementing this into a local legislation actually comes with quite a huge change in how countries and how competent authorities have to do their business. I know this because Estonia, where I work, we've actually done this sort of an extensive overhaul of our operations back in 2019 and 2020, when we transposed the first NIS directive into our Estonian legislation. And we went, so to speak, a little bit further than what the directive actually wanted, or what the directive, well, what was the minimum that the directive actually said. And so we actually, in Estonia, we put in place a system and a security standard and a way to impose this and enforce the compliance of this security standard. And this actually means that there needs to be a very clear mandate: who has to do this, who doesn't have to do this. Will there be court cases? Will there be some sanctions somewhere for those parties who do not comply with the local legislation? So what we did was that we actually took and went a lot further than the original NIS directive needed. And now the rest of the European countries are actually a little bit struggling in building those kinds of ecosystems that are required for this to work. Let me just give you an example. The logical way of looking at this is that NIS tells some companies who are critical companies that they have to follow certain cybersecurity rules. Okay, sounds easy. And it also says that the competent authority or the government has to enforce this. Also sounds easy, right? If you are enforcing something, you need to make it as clear as possible. What are you imposing? What is it, the compliance that is required? Is it compliance? Is it compliance to a standard? Then what kinds of standards are accepted? If it is a standard and it's accepted, what does compliance mean? Does it only mean audits? Or does it mean audits plus some sort of enforcement action before or after? What does it mean if there's enforcement action in Estonia? What does it mean in Germany? What does it mean in Belgium? What does it mean in France, Portugal, other places? What do all those things actually mean in practice? And this has to be trained, this has to be exercised, this has to be piloted, and these pilots have to be taken, and some lessons need to be learned, and these organizations actually need to work together with these companies that are required to do things in order for a government to say that, hey, we actually have this system in place. You have this enforcement of, I don't know, food safety. Food safety is a very good example. There is a system in place. There are offices all around different countries, different cities, which go pick out some new places, and then they go and check on whether they are compliant with all the regulations and food safety regulations. Do you have this in cybersecurity in your country? I guess you don't right now. And if you need to do your country to do this, then that system needs to be built. And for a small country like Estonia, it's been not easy, but it's been like doable, and it has taken time and it has taken effort, tears and court cases. Like, we have a system in place now which we can utilize so that the NIS2 transposition would be easier. That being said, Estonia is one of those countries which hasn't really our legislation yet, so we're late. And even if we have this system in place already, it doesn't really mean that we can boast and say that, hey, we got this and others don't.
But by the way, what I'm hearing right now is that even with the earlier or the first edition of the directive, already kind of we in Estonia anticipated the future requirements, and also the companies who are subject to the NIS2 directive, then they are also quite, then I'm assuming, quite ready for the new implementation as well.
Yes, I would say in Estonia, the organizations I would say organizations first, because NIS directive, it applies to public organizations, or basically public sector, but also some private sector, because private sector are the ones who are providing the electricity, the water, the food, the manufacturing, also the digital infrastructure, and those. These organizations already are deemed vital, or those who are doing vital services. They have a special designation under the Estonian regulation. They already have to know that they are doing this. That also means that they get some extra special care, or like they have to follow additional rules, but they also get some additional benefits, I think, for being these vital suppliers of food and energy. And in Estonia's case, we're a northern country, even the companies who are cleaning the streets from snow in the winter, those are deemed vital as well.
Wow.
Which also means, by the way, that those companies in Estonia's case have to follow the same rules as some of the banks and some of the energy companies and so on. And this sort of like a blanket for critical or vital organizations is something that we've struggled with in Estonia, and we are working on differentiating this. But for enforcement purposes, I'm just saying, I want to reiterate this, the system has to be in place so that if there's anybody coming in to check on whether you are compliant or not compliant, they need to know what is the compliance about.
What does it look like?
What does it look like?
Yeah.
I understand that your software, your services, this helps to understand what is required and what is necessary. But in different countries, it looks different. Estonia has its own security standard, and it's going to have some variations of that security standard. There are other security standards, ISO standard. There's Center for Internet Security 18 measures. There's NIST frameworks which are there. And then there are a ton of different local small scale versions of this, and all the standards. It begs a question. How does it work with DORA? How does it work with NIS2? How does it work with, does DORA and NIS2, do they overlap? Because DORA and NIS2, they aren't standards. They refer to standards in the end. And so the company doesn't have to comply with DORA or NIS2 specifically, but it has to comply with a standard which is accepted by that member state or that DORA or NIS2 in that sense.
By the way, you mentioned DORA, and it has overlaps, of course, with in terms of critical entities and also the regulations or requirements there. But I just wanted to ask, who is the competent authority for DORA's sake in Estonia?
Oh, in Estonia? It's a different one, yeah. The financial inspection something. It's a financial regulator who is responsible for DORA, but they will and they do work with us at RIA so that the cybersecurity specific expertise isn't lost or isn't fragmented between the competent authorities that are doing the compliance and the enforcement activities.
Of course, to avoid the duplication of work, I presume. If one has audited, does the other one kind of take it from there?
Yeah, this is exactly what we're trying to say, is that we work together, and then these kinds of compliance things, the ecosystems have to work together. And it doesn't work in a way that many different government entities come and do the same thing. But that being said, like the compliance with NIS2 and DORA, it actually, like in Estonia's case, it affects a very small number of private customers. It affects a lot of public customers or public sector entities, especially in Estonia. It does affect healthcare, it does affect finance, and it will affect the tons of smaller scale, I don't know, water treatment plants and all those kinds of things. But like thinking about how many of these organizations are smaller than the NIS2 threshold of medium companies of under 50 people or under the revenue of 10 million euros per year, this will affect quite a small number of private companies. And that being said, it's a hassle for these competent authorities to actually go into compliance and enforcement where most of your clients will be people from your own government or like people from the other branch of government or a local government or something like that.
Yeah, you mentioned that there are not too many changes implementing NIS2, but there are some quite major differences, right?
Yes.
So could you highlight these specific ones?
Absolutely. So one of the things that member states are still struggling with is exactly the last thing that I said, that the public sector authorities are now subject to NIS2 requirements, and that also means that they have to be this has to be enforced and so on and so forth. This is something that sounds bureaucratic, but this is something that is really a big thing. But in terms of the differences between the first network directive and the new one, The biggest changes is the scope of who are the sectors that are involved. And the second biggest thing is that it narrows, or not narrows, it's the other way around. It expands the types of measures that need to be taken by these organizations to be compliant. The first directive was very broad, so it gave a lot of freedom for countries to actually say that, yes, this is good, this is not good, this can be done, this couldn't be done. And the new directive actually makes it very specific of what types of measures do these organizations need to take. For example, incident handling, or how to prepare for backups and some crisis management, those kinds of things. Those are very specific things. Cryptography, NIS2 entities, subjects of NIS2, they need to take into account of how and where to do encryption. And how do they do encryption? So if you go to a local municipality in Estonia and ask them, hey, you got 27 people working for your municipality, most of them are in education and some of them are about elderly care, but how do you do encryption? And so these are the questions that they need to find some sort of a logic that how to actually start enforcing those kinds of things, which are very, very specific, very IT specific, very cybersecurity specific, and everything needs a supply chain. In that sense, they need some service providers. Those service providers need to know what services do they need to provide to these companies. It's, like I said, it's an ecosystem, and this ecosystem needs care. This ecosystem needs to be understood, and it needs to be legalized in a way that everybody understands that if I do this, I will be off the hook, so to speak. And it's much more specific than the GDPR, where sort of everyone is a subject, and thus no one needs to, everybody has to do something, and then nobody was actually like targeted in a specific way and so on. It's a little bit of a different thing. Also, the new NIS2 directive, the scope is larger. It includes some of the sectors that were previously not deemed critical or vital, such as food production, manufacturing, research, space, and those kinds of sectors which traditionally have governed themselves in terms of risk, and gives the competent authorities such as a lot of leeway in how to deal with these companies which are not compliant. We need to make sure that these organizations are being led in a way that is responsible, to the point that NIS2, the original text, actually says that the governance of these companies which are deemed critical, these leaders of these companies need to have cybersecurity awareness training. So the big question is, so what do we do if they don't?
Exactly. How do you
So
punish them?
Yes, do we actually go and take this private company who has installed these leaders of this private company, and do we
remove them?
Force them out because they didn't go through a cybersecurity awareness training? Those kinds of small questions are very specific in the original directive text. And I understand, because like this speaks to the heart of some standards. They say that like, oh, that cybersecurity is a leadership question just as well as a technical question, which means that the leaders need to be aware of this cybersecurity and risk. And it comes from this idea that is being taken from some of the security standards. But if you take it word by word, then it may lead you to believe that it is possible for a competent authority to say, you are not the captain anymore.
It's actually surprising. It would be so great to understand like how each of these clauses, what is the rationale behind all these clauses. For example, this leadership cybersecurity training, I would assume all kind of responsible people would look into the cybersecurity regardless of the requirements.
Exactly.
Right?
You would assume that. You would
Exactly.
assume that everybody would take this seriously. But we are here, we're talking between the four of us and between the participants of this webinar who are highly aware of
Right.
the importance of cybersecurity. But out there, we're talking about people who are farmers. We're talking about people who manufacture equipment to build houses or something like that. Do you think they
Right.
ever think about cybersecurity? Obviously, they do once an incident happens or they lose money because of it. But in everyday business sense, I'm not sure.
So
Actually, related to that, where would you, Lauri, suggest these type of organizations to begin with? Let's say they are completely new to cybersecurity and now suddenly they find themselves subject to it. Where would you recommend them to start?
Okay, so these companies who are just finding themselves that, hey, I need to be compliant somehow, need to basically start with the question of what is the state of cybersecurity or IT security in my organization at all? What is it? What is it that we do? And what is it that we don't do? Those are some of the questions that need to be. All of the competent authorities in different countries, in different member states, have specific and dedicated websites and information packages for these NIS2 or NIS, these people who need to be, these organizations who need to be compliant. And those maybe have a starting package of what are the first 5 things you need to do, what are the first 10 things you need to do. But my suggestion, and it's a very sort of a selfish suggestion as well, and I'm sorry about that, is that if you are only starting out in cybersecurity and don't know any place where to start, go and find a cybersecurity consultancy company. They will help you. They will actually help you. They will map your organization. They will come in and they will ask you questions. They will even take a look at your IT infrastructure and take a look and say, hey, you have this like one server here in this corner and that's never been updated and it still has a password, admin password. And so basically all your troubles are going to be starting with that one server over there in the corner that you maybe have never thought about. And so these are the questions that maybe you might need to find help, outside help, who could give you like a certain new perspective on what is it that you do. What is the core business that you need to protect? What is the core business in terms of your, we call them crown jewels, like the data or the operations that are basically so core that without it, you will stop working or stop providing your services or products. Outside consultancy can help you get moving very fast. And the learning curve there will be quick. And I seriously suggest that if you try to figure it all out on your own, it may not be as effective as with outside help.
Thank you for that. But is there a limit to outsourcing? Is there some point you probably need to internalize this knowledge, or can you go all the way outsourcing?
I probably think that Peter can talk to this at one point as well. But the outsourcing versus internalizing this, actually, in my view, and what we've talked about in our agency, it relates very much to the size of the organization and the size of the IT operations that you have. If you're a mom and pop store, as they call it in the United States, then you probably don't need like a dedicated information security at CISO, this person who only takes care of the information security. If you already are over, say, 50 people and over, say, €1 million in annual turnover, then you may need to take a hard look at who is going to be responsible for the information security in your organization. And so you can hire them, and maybe after a little bit more of scaling up, they need a team to make sure that everything is done properly. It's a scale question, and definitely from one point you need to internalize this as well. But again, I'm saying that these guys who are responsible for water treatment in a small rural area, who employ 10 people, most of which are the people who are just basically going around and digging holes, they don't need to get a special information security specialist when they can actually contract that and outsource this from a local information security company.
But to that point, actually, our audience here, because we have many companies who are our customers that are working on medical devices. So let's take this example that like a big hospital that is subject to NIS2 requirements, they are using presumably tens or hundreds of different information systems or integrations, both public and private and so forth. If I would be like a software as a medical device, if I'm providing this to this hospital that is used for patient care or monitoring or treatment, should I look into the NIS2 as well? Or should I expect my software to be deemed as critical software as well?
Okay, so the logic here is it comes down to the same ecosystem question. The NIS2, one of the requirements that is there and one of the requirements that is also going to go through this standard is that this hospital needs to be compliant, which means that they need to follow an information security standard. And one of the things that they need to do is take a look at their supply chain as well, which also means that this hospital, once they are going to get compliant, they are going to review all the contracts and all the outsourcing and all the accesses that they give to outside organizations. For example, if you as a medical equipment company don't just provide a tool, just a standalone tool, but if you need to get access to this company's internal systems, then you will be contacted by that hospital and your contract will be renegotiated so that they would have the certainty that you are also taking care of your cybersecurity, and so that that hospital would not be compromised because of your inability to or your unwillingness to do security. So basically this supply chain issue in NIS2 and in the standards as well should go a long way, so that your medical equipment company, you also need to make sure that your partners somewhere abroad are, and they need to make sure that their partners, and this is the way that it should have this sort of trickle down effect to it. But NIS2 is a little bit of a different thing, that these medical equipment providers, they may not be directly need to be compliant, but they may need to be compliant because the person or the organization who is going to be procuring your services needs to be compliant, and thus they will ask you to be compliant with a security service as well, a security standard as well.
I feel already that we should have booked at least 2 hour webinar this time on the forum, because I have so many questions for you still, Lauri, but the time is not in our favor at the moment. So I will has hands-on experience implementing information security, one of the standards, of course, 27001, for the last 7 years at Doccle. So actually, could you describe Doccle's product or service a little for us, so we understand exactly what is your angle?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So it started in 2012, and at this point we have about 3.5 million users, and with more than 1 billion of documents and information inside our system. So you can imagine that keeping these things secure is our top priority, because people see that this system is a trustworthy system. Our security is our number one priority. Yeah.
Because so it's financial documentation, right?
It's financial, it's medical, it's invoices, it's your payslip. So you don't want that somebody else sees your payslip. That's in Belgium, everybody keeps his payslip for itself. So I don't know if it's the same for you guys, but and also banks, insurance companies send their documents into our platform. So you can imagine that if data is leaked from our system, then we really have an issue. And
trust issue, definitely.
Yeah, so it's trusted, and so there you also see that this NIS2 comes into play there as well. We see that if from the NIS2 regulation, and I think Lauri already mentioned it, you have these thresholds like 50 people, and I think 10 million of revenue threshold. Yeah, we are a small company where we are below 50 and we are below 10 million, but as you can see, we have tons of information. So you can imagine that the banks, the insurance companies, the water companies where we work for, so, yeah, they ask us, hey, Doccle, you also need to be compliant with NIS2. Huh? That is the key of this whole implementation. We as Doccle, to be honest, if we take the NIS2 law by the letter, we do not have to be compliant, but we are compliant. Huh? So within this supply chain, you cannot escape from the NIS2 regulation. And we do not want to escape from this regulation either, because it's so important. If you take the necessary measure, like the 7001 implementation, then I think you're on a good track.
And you are not the CISO. Let's be clear about that. You are a chief operating officer. So a lot of like other topics presumably land on your shoulders as well. It's
indeed,
not just the infosecurity.
That's the way it goes in smaller companies. Huh? I don't have a compliance team. I don't have a security team. It's me, myself, and I for certain topics. But of course, you need to have some involvement from your colleagues, from your top level management. If you don't have their support, then you're lost. So you really need to have this engagement from your top level management to go through with this kind of project, because it's still a project. I think that Laurie can also agree with that. You don't do this in 3 months' time. You need a certain time, for me, at least 1 year before you get through all to the different processes, the different steps towards ISO certification, NIS2, compliancy. It's all a bit of the same.
But when you started, like I understand you've been working at Doccle more than 8 years, and you have been for the last 7 years, you have been ISO 27001 certified. You mentioned that the consultants could speed things up. Did you use any of that consultancy externally, and how was the experience?
Yeah, I did the same. So Laurie is correct. What I did is I hired an 27001 consultant for, I think, 10 mandates, and he really had the steps. He also had templates, to be honest, guys. Don't try to write everything from scratch. I know there's ChatGPT and other stuff which was not available in 2019, but there are some nice templates, packages out there which already give you a head start. If you don't do that, don't try to look for an acceptable use policy or a business continuity policy on the internet. Try to make it coherent and try to work with templates and other tools. They are out there. And it already gives you a head start. And then, of course, you need to tailor it towards your own business.
And for the audience, just to clarify here, we are not talking about outsourcing your compliance. We are talking about learning from an experienced person, so you speed up understanding what are the requirements, how they reflect back to your organization, what exactly you could do to fulfill the requirements. Just
totally correct.
Yeah.
Because also 27001 start from your processes. If you're a small company, as Laurie said, 10 people digging in holes, or you're a big company, it all starts with what processes do you have in your company? Do you have an HR department or not? Do you have a finance department or not? All these processes have their own specifics, have their own tools, have their own data. If you start from this process angle, you can really make it a bit more tangible, because if you have a look at the ISO 27001 93 controls, it will come to you as as really a huge thing to do. But if you start from the process and say, okay, dear HR, what are you doing for the securing our personnel? Then they will come up with some stuff, and then you can adapt. But this is key. You need to start from processes and not by the standard. So there are different angles to tackle it.
And processes linked to the systems. Of course, HR might be using also some external system to track your employee data and so forth. You just went through in February, I believe, the last certification route against I think the current edition is 22, and previous to that it was 2013. So has there been any dramatic changes for the standard revisions as well?
Yeah, for me, yes, there was. It's more comprehensive, the 2022 version. You have these 4 big blocks: the organizational controls, people controls, physical and technical, logical controls. It's a bit more easy to understand what is really in those blocks. So for me, that's one of the key things. And of course, it's more up to date with today's standards. For instance, they have these cloud hosting controls. Most of the companies, and we as well, just as a side note, we have an office, but we don't need an office. We don't have an internal network. Everything is SaaS-based. So we work with cloud providers all over the place. So these controls, these specific controls of cloud, have been added to the 2022 version. And also, for instance, business continuity is more important than it was in the 2013 version. And for us personally, when moving from 2013 to 2022, we moved everything away from, we structured everything into Confluence and also in Jira. And we got rid of all our Word and Excel documents. That's really the way we moved away from 2013.
Yeah, Excel is an amazing place to start with. I'm all for that. But the moment you need to have some collaboration done, then even if it's on Google Sheets, this is a collaboration space that we are, of course, everybody is familiar where we are in Jira. But any collaboration space, of course, if your team is working already on some collaboration platform, then bringing this kind of compliance processes closer where the team is actually working is also making the compliance topics more understandable, more relatable for the team members, I believe. Is it the same experience that you had?
I cannot agree more, Monica. So all our development teams work in Jira all day long. And if you we are almost 50 people, I think 30 of them are developers. So they work mainly in Jira, they do their sprint planning. But what we did is we put our risk management also in Jira. Onboarding, offboarding of staff is put in Jira. We have a compliance dashboard in Jira. We have a privacy dashboard, security dashboard. Everything was put into Jira and no Excel anymore. And you can link all those topics together. And that's what makes it very easy. If you have a risk, for instance, and you create this risk in your tool, in the SoftComply tool, it's a Jira ticket. And if I have a product risk, I can easily say to the product guys, hey guys, we have a product risk. What development tickets will be linked to this risk? Because otherwise it's just Excel saying, okay, we will do something about it in product team. But now if you take that to an auditor, it will say, okay, you have defined your risk. What is your countermeasures and how you will solve it? That's a very easy and transparent thing you can do.
I have a question actually from the audience for Peter. So the question is actually about the same thing, the coordination of when something actually goes wrong, but across the supply chain. The question is that in sectors like healthcare and finance, where the risk is high and interdependence in a supply chain, what does actual shared responsibility look like in practice? How do we move from paperwork into real-time coordination when something goes wrong?
Yeah. So what we did is our notification processes and also our information processes towards our end customer one side, but also suppliers on the other side, are put into processes into Confluence. And from there on, we have a good view on who to contact. It all starts with your data. Where does your data reside? Which data mapping, creating a data mapping, and see from there which suppliers need to be contacted in case something happens. But in my opinion, it starts with your data mapping. Where's my data? Which supplier? And link it from there.
Perfect. Thank you.
I think, Lauri, also this is partially a question for you as well. So the kind of the big companies who are required to report the incident with quite strict timeframes, I would have to say, they would need to get the first information from the supplier in many cases, right? But this is not covered by the incident management team reporting.
Okay, again, the logic on how incidents are being reported and what is required from these NIS2 subjects from the competent authority are all very different from member state to member state.
The timelines are the same, right? 24 hours, 72, 1 month.
Yes, those timelines need to be very similar, but the amount of information that's going to come into our competent authority in that time is very different. The idea that something is happening is you don't need your partner to actually validate that your service is down if your service is down. And this is the only thing that you need to basically say to the competent authority if you want to follow this 24-hour thing. This is obviously everybody wants to. The incident reporting is one of the good examples on how everybody wants to do the best that they can do. Like, I need to collect all the information that I already have. I don't want to give out partial information or something like that. And we totally understand that it may create some fog of war or something like that, we would call. But at the same time, the incident response and CERT teams in competent authorities, they just want to know that something is going on. They just want to be aware that whether they need to be on a higher alert or a lower alert, will you be able to manage it on your own or not? I mean, this is something that incident reporting does not have to end in some sort of a enforcement action from the competent authority. It usually doesn't, but sometimes we just need to know if something is going to be happening with I don't know, the energy sector or health sector, that we may need to we may need to notify some additional people.
Yeah, thanks for this. Noted. Don't go overboard with the information density in the first notification.
Absolutely, yeah.
Just inform.
It's a little bit on us as well, and I'm sorry to just interrupt you there, but it's a little bit on us that a government entity usually wants to make this like initial reporting template as long as possible. That there would be everything starting from like what happened to where were you at the time when something happened and what were you wearing or something like that. And those templates run long. But eventually, if you just report to them that something is happening, it's better than just telling them, wait, I haven't filled out all the fields in this template yet. I can't really tell you anything yet because I haven't gotten all the information. So it's a little bit on us as well.
So I understand the notification is actually also the most important. I think it's when the incident can have cross-border effect. So also the information is moved to other member states if necessary. But I had this thought, like your role, Peter, is having these different hats, presumably. I mean, CISO, the COO is already a combination of different things. Every COO is different in every organization, I believe, having different responsibilities. But do you believe that going hands in with information security, risk management, and in general the policy making in your organization has made you better in designing the other processes, in purchasing decisions, and all this kind of having this information security angle always on?
It absolutely does, because just for an example, which is really from this afternoon, it's the marketing guys now are launching a really nice campaign, and you really need to every time again tell them, guys, what you're doing there maybe not so secure. So they are now launching, or they want to launch some campaign website, which is hosted not at Doccle site, but at a marketing company who doesn't have any clue about security. So you really, by bringing this awareness, but as I said, I've been bringing a lot of awareness in the last years, but even then, they're all based in their own process, and like marketing guys, they're, to be honest, they are absolutely difficult to control, but you have to bring them back. And what will happen now is that this campaign website will not be hosted at Doccle site, but will be hosted at a marketing company. What you can do as a CISO or COO, whatever role, is to say, okay, guys, we can launch this, but we will need to do the necessary checks. So you can also say, okay, guys, I accept this risk, but this is the boundary. So at least you need to do a site security test before you launch something like that. You need to be engaged with all your colleagues at every time.
In my experience, the best either compliance head, quality managers, DPOs, CISOs, and so forth, they are not the kind of the naysayers. They are not putting stop at things, but they are supporting the teams on telling how it should be done. So all these regulations, they are not saying to us, or directives or laws, they are not saying to us what you are restricted to do, but what are the circumstances that you need to consider when you're doing something.
I think
exception of the criminal law, of course.
and certainly the role of a CISO is, first of all, is to help the business. It's not that we are there to block the business. So that's the first. And you need to come up with alternatives.
Exactly.
Indeed, that's your role. And if you do that right, then people will also appreciate your involvement, but don't say no just to say no. That's not what all the rules have been made for, neither.
The time is running mercilessly.
There is one question to Peter about the same question that Lauri took about if it is a company that only now starts with cybersecurity. You already said that get a consultant, get templates. There is a lot of help out there. Be realistic to what you're actually doing. Don't just look at the standard and the ideal picture of what is described there. Is there anything else that you would like to add for somebody that is only now beginning their journey to cybersecurity management?
Yeah, so first of all, Laurie already mentioned, what are my crowd jewels? What am I protecting? Make a list from 5 to 10, not more than that. Start with that. Secondly, as I said, it's process-based. What are your processes? Not difficult because you're your own company. And from there on, create your asset register. So what are my assets? What tools do I have? What people do I have? Think about tangible assets, but also think about intangible assets. What are my people? What is my knowledge? What is my intellectual property? So that I would do as a step. And then from that asset register, what is now the risks we have if we run our company? And I would not only go for information security risks, it's also about business risks. What are my competitors? My supplier risks, we touched upon it already. If one of my suppliers goes bankrupt, what is the effect for me? And of course, also, most of them are product companies. What are my product risks? So from your assets to your risks, and from there on, you can go have a look at the standards. As I said, the 4 blocks, it's really comprehensible. Go find somebody in HR to do the people controls. Go find somebody in IT to do the technological controls. And as I also said, guys, take a look at the company who already provides you tons of templates, and don't start by Googling it or by ChatGPTing it. It will not help you.
Yeah, the hallucinations might become your reality then, because if you put in place some procedures, you need to keep on following these procedures. Right?
Yeah. And what I really learned from audits as well is that you can write a lot of nice ChatGPT written acceptable use policies or business continuity policies. But if you don't act like your policy, it will not take 10 minutes. And the auditor has said, okay, guys, but you wrote something, but it's not your business. So you really need to go from the process, from the business, and build it up from there, and not the other way around.
That's a perfect guide. Thank you.
Yeah. And I love the way you put it all into one holistic kind of universe of picture, really, because this is the health of the company in the end as well. We all went through, was it 2018? That's a long time ago when GDPR came into force as well. We needed to look into all of our processes, all of our vendors or the supply chain the same way. You have done actually a significant amount of work defining your critical, at least your critical kind of subcontractors, for example. So you have done a lot of work. Now it's a different spin, different look at them from information security perspective. Which is really highly connected to your data protection as well. So it's actually a second kind of layer on the job that you probably have done already and will continue to do. Any kind of future visions from your side, Lauri, what will happen with us in 5 years' time?
Oh, there's a lot. And one of the things that everybody who is dealing with digital tools and even IT services need to be aware of something called the Cyber Resilience Act, which means that everybody needs to either self-certify or have their product certified somehow. But I just wanted to, at the very end here, just to say one more thing, is that I know that we talk a lot about compliance, but this information security is not for us too much about compliance, but it's about like real world implications. And so one of the things that I really want to remind you is that if you're in your company or the company you work for, everything goes down. There's a ransomware incident. There is something that takes out all of your backup plans on how to recover in those systems. Have a piece of paper somewhere. Have a piece of paper somewhere which tells you who to call, which tells you where to start. That piece of paper may end up saving you that you may have a very good system, either Excel or Jira or whatever. But if everything is down and you can't get to either any place like that, then just get a piece of paper where at least the important phone numbers are written down.
Thank you so much for this reminder. Information security, but we end with talking about having information on paper. Well, amazing. You guys have been so supportive putting this forum together for our audience here. Thank you so much, Peter and Lauri, for today's session. I wish to continue this, honestly, but looking forward to kind of hearing from you and of your successes, both of you, and wishing you a pleasant evening. Most of our audience is also from Europe today. You're welcome to keep an eye on our future user forums. We will continue this. You can look at our website under resources there. You will see the previous user forums as well. So there are recordings available, and this recording will be also available there. And further to this, we will be sending you a couple of cheat sheets from within our app, the checklist for 27001 and some dashboard views. In case you are a Risk Manager Plus user already and you have missed the new functionality, then this should be guiding you right to this feature. Thank you so much. With this, we need to end it today.